It was 2:07 a.m. when my phone buzzed. Security alert, motion detected in the backyard. At first I thought it was a raccoon or maybe the wind tripping the motion sensors. But then I checked the camera feed, and my blood ran cold. There she was, dressed in black, climbing my fence, a gas-powered chainsaw in her hands. It wasn't some stranger. It wasn't a burglar. It was Nayan Lair, my neighbor, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, the same woman who had tried to cut down my century-old oak tree in broad daylight weeks earlier, citing some fake bylaw about storm hazards. The same woman who forged violation notices, screamed at kids over wind chimes, and filed bogus complaints against half the street. And now, she was back. Only this time, she wasn't hiding behind HOA nonsense. She came in the dark, she came alone, and she came with one mission: finish the job she started. The camera caught it all, her climbing over my gate, approaching the oak like it had wronged her personally, pulling the starter cord with a snarl that still gives me chills. That chainsaw roared to life, slicing into the tree I'd grown up with, my backyard's heart, the shade over decades of memories. She got halfway through the trunk before the cops arrived, caught, red-handed, chainsaw still humming. That night didn't just end in sirens. It ended with handcuffs, a felony charge, and a secret history unraveling in front of the entire neighborhood. But trust me, this wasn't how it started. No, this storm had been brewing for months. From the moment she moved in with a fake smile and a rulebook in her fist, she was looking for a fight. And unfortunately for her, she picked the wrong tree. If you're ready for one of the craziest HOA neighbor stories you've ever heard, full of lies, revenge, midnight madness, and karma swinging harder than a storm wind, stick around. And hey, if you enjoy stones, reads like this full of real drama and satisfying justice, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next. It started with the buzz of a chainsaw and ended with handcuffs in the middle of the night. If you'd asked me 6 months ago if something like that would ever happen on our peaceful little street in Willow Bend, I would have laughed, cracked open a cold beer, and offered you a seat on the porch. Back then, my biggest problem was keeping the squirrels from tearing through my tomato beds. I had a predictable life, the kind where you know every crack in the sidewalk and every neighbor's dog by name. I liked it that way. But now, let's just say I've got motion sensor floodlights, security cameras with night vision, and a direct line to a local officer at the precinct. The first time I met Nayan Lair, I had no idea what kind of storm she was about to bring into our neighborhood. She moved in 3 houses down, arriving in a pristine white SUV and heels too tall for walking on gravel. She had one of those tight, insincere smiles, like she was clenching a lemon seed behind her teeth and pretending it was candy. She introduced herself while pointing at my mailbox and said, "That's not HOA standard. No hello. No how are you. Just that." I blinked, smiled politely, told her I'd look into it, and then promptly forgot about her the second I stepped back inside. I figured she was just one of those people who reads too many rule books and needs to feel important. But by the end of that same week, she had already filed 3 complaints with the HOA. One neighbor was cited for a visible trash can behind his fence, another for having a basketball hoop overhanging the street, one that had been there since the Bush administration, and someone else, get this, was written up for wind chimes. Wind chimes. According to her, they were disturbing the natural harmony. The neighborhood group chat lit up with confusion, amusement, and a growing sense of dread. Me? I stayed off her radar. I keep my place tidy, not to impress the HOA, but because I like feeling good when I pull into my driveway. I mow my lawn on a regular schedule. I edge the sidewalk. I trim the hedges and repaint the shutters every spring like clockwork. But the true pride of my property is my backyard, specifically a massive white oak that's well over 100 years old. It's the heart of the lot. Its branches stretch wide like open arms, its roots hold the soil together, and its shade has been the perfect canopy for everything from family barbecues to Sunday afternoon naps. My dad used to say trees are the best neighbors, quiet, reliable, and full of life. They don't borrow your tools, they don't host parties that go until 2 a.m., and they don't care if you vote red or blue. That tree had watched over the property longer than I'd been alive. It was practically a member of the family. So on a random Tuesday in April, when I was in the middle of a Zoom call with a client and heard that distant whine, sharp and mechanical, I didn't think much of it. Probably city workers trimming the street trees, I figured. But then the sound got louder, closer, meaner, like it was moving toward my property. I mumbled an apology, hit mute, and stepped out the sliding back door. And there she was, Nain Lair, in my backyard, standing next to my oak tree, holding a gas-powered chainsaw like it was an extension of her arm. I froze. It took my brain a few seconds to process the sight. Her expensive-looking tracksuit, the gleam of the chainsaw blade, the inch-deep gouge she'd already carved into the bark of my beloved oak. "What the hell are you doing?" I barked, voice sharp and rising fast. She looked over her shoulder at me like I had just interrupted her yoga class, completely unfazed. "Oh, good morning, Miles," she chirped, smiling like we were old friends. "Just taking care of the tree issue." I stepped forward, heart hammering. "Tree issue? That's my tree, on my property, and you're trespassing with a weapon." She actually laughed, then replied, "Well, according to HOA Bylaw 48B, trees over 35 feet must be reviewed for potential storm damage. This one's at least 40. I measured. I blinked. "You guessed," I snapped, "and that bylaw doesn't exist. I've read the entire manual front to back, twice." She lifted her chin. "I'm the new HOA president, Miles. The election was last week. You'd know that if you attended meetings." That caught me off guard. I'd heard rumors she'd been sniffing around the landscaping committee, but president? No way. No one mentioned it. No notices had been sent out. Still, I kept my voice steady. "Even if you were, which you're not, you still need permits, a hearing, and common sense. You can't just walk into someone's yard and take down a tree like you're Paul Bunyan in a tracksuit." She pouted slightly and set the chainsaw down. "Well then," she huffed, "you can expect a violation notice. Daily fines until the tree is removed." Then she turned on her heel and walked off, her heels clicking against the patio stones like little punctuation marks on an unhinged monologue. I stood there in stunned silence, staring at the scar she'd made on the tree's trunk. My jaw clenched. My hands curled into fists. My tree. Violated. That evening, I made 2 calls. First to my friend Logan, a property attorney who lives 2 streets over. I told him the whole story. He nearly choked on his coffee. "Document everything," he said. "Take photos, call the cops, and install cameras tonight. That tree might be worth more than her entire house." Turns out he was right. The cops showed up within the hour. Officer Singh and Officer Morales walked the property with me. Singh took one look at the gash in the oak's trunk, let out a long whistle, and said something that made my blood run cold. "This is felony territory." "Felony territory," Officer Sinros. GH repeated, crouching to examine the cut like it was a crime scene. And frankly, it was. "This tree's over 100 years old, probably protected under city ordinances. She's lucky you stopped her when you did." Morales took photos while Singh asked me to walk him through everything again, from how I found her on the property to what she said about being the new HOA president. I handed him my phone, already filled with photos I'd taken of the damage and the spot where she'd set the chainsaw down. He scrolled through them, frowning. "She didn't just trespass," he said. "She brought a gas-powered saw onto your land and started cutting. That's criminal mischief at best. Felony property destruction at worst. Depending on the value of the tree, this could get serious." That was enough for me. I filed a formal police report on the spot. Singh warned me, calmly but clearly, that people like Nan, entitled, controlling, and looking for power, tend to escalate when challenged. "Watch your back," he said before they left, "and watch your property." So I took his advice. By sundown, I'd ordered a full set of security cameras, top-of-the-line ones with motion detection, night vision, cloud backups, and enough clarity to catch a mosquito mid-flight. Installation took me into the early hours of the morning, but by the time I went to bed, my house was lit up like Fort Knox. I covered every angle, front yard, side gate, and most importantly, the backyard and oak tree. The very next day, I got a letter in the mail, thick envelope, HOA logo printed right on the front. I opened it and almost burst out laughing. It was a formal violation notice, citing me for unauthorized natural obstructions exceeding height limitations, and demanding the immediate removal of dangerous flora. The fine? $500 upfront plus $100 a day for non-compliance. I almost didn't notice the signature at first, written in overly loopy cursive that took up a third of the page. Nain Lair, President, Willow Bend, HOA. The absurdity would have been funny if it weren't infuriating. Not only had she trespassed and damaged my property, she was now forging HOA documents and trying to extort money from me under a title she didn't even hold. I snapped a picture of the letter and forwarded it straight to Glenn, the actual HOA president who I'd known for years. Within minutes, my phone rang. "Yeah, that's fake," Glenn said before I could even say hello. "She's not the president. Elections aren't until October, and she barely made it onto the landscaping committee." "You sure?" I asked, still fuming. "Because she's issuing fines like she owns the neighborhood." Glenn sighed. "She's submitted a dozen proposals in the last month. Wants to ban lawn ornaments, add paint restrictions, even outlaw garden gnomes. She's intense. Intense is one word for it." "I'll talk to the board," he said, "and I'm sending an official cease and desist on our letterhead. She's way out of line." And yet, even with Glenn involved, something in my gut told me this wasn't over, not by a long shot. For a few days, things were quiet, too quiet. No letters, no saws, no surprise appearances, just a faint tension in the air, like the smell of ozone before a storm. And wouldn't you know it, the storm came. 5 days later, a real thunderstorm rolled in. Not the metaphorical kind, but a full-on, house-rattling, wind-howling beast. Rain slammed the windows sideways. Lightning split the sky. The power flickered once, twice, then gave up entirely. I lit a few candles and rode it out with a book and a flashlight. By noon the next day, the clouds began to clear. I went for a drive to check on the neighborhood, half out of curiosity, half out of concern. Tree branches were scattered across lawns, trash cans blown down the street like tumbleweeds. But when I turned onto Pine Grove Lane, my foot hit the brakes hard. There it was, Nenlair's house, or what was left of it. A massive pine tree, dead for as long as anyone could remember, had come down straight through her living room roof. The trunk looked like a spear jammed into the center of the house. Splinters, insulation, and roof tiles were everywhere. Firefighters were already on scene, securing the perimeter and checking for gas leaks. A small group of neighbors stood in a loose semicircle across the street, watching in stunned silence. I pulled over and joined them. "Poetic justice," Alina whispered beside me. She lived next door to Nan and had dealt with her complaints firsthand. She refused to remove that tree, said it was part of the aesthetic. People warned her for years. I couldn't help it. I stared at the destruction, at the gaping hole in her roof, and felt something stir in my chest. Not joy, not satisfaction, just irony. The woman who tried to destroy my healthy oak for the sake of her imaginary rules had let an actual dead hazard rot 10 feet from her own front porch. No one was hurt, thankfully. But then, as I turned to leave, I heard a shriek from the front steps. "You!" I turned, and there she was. Nain, wrapped in a bathrobe soaked with rain, hair wild, eyes burning. She came stomping across her lawn like a banshee on a warpath. "This is your fault!" she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You did this to me! You did this to me!" The words cut through the rainy air like a slap, and for a second, I genuinely thought she might lunge at me. She marched across the lawn barefoot, mud slapping at her ankles, bathrobe flapping like a cape, and eyes so wide they looked like they might pop right out of her head. What? I blinked, still stunned by the sight of her shattered roof. "What are you even talking about? You reported my tree," she screeched. "You knew it was a danger. You orchestrated this entire thing as revenge for the oak." I actually looked over my shoulder for a hidden camera. Surely this was some kind of prank. I mean, did she actually believe I had control over the weather, or that I made the storm happen just to teach her a lesson? "Nan," I said as calmly as I could. "I didn't even know that tree was dead. I never reported it. You think I control the weather now?" But she wasn't listening. Her voice rose an octave with every sentence, raving about harassment, property sabotage, and some bizarre conspiracy where I'd supposedly threatened her into cutting my tree so that I could retaliate. She sounded completely unhinged. Neighbors were watching, some were whispering, a few had their phones out, and then, like divine intervention, Alina stepped in. "That's not true," she said firmly, stepping between us like a guardian angel with perfect timing. "Everyone here knows Miles lives across the street. His tree doesn't even face yours. You brought this on yourself." Another neighbor chimed in, then another. A soft chorus of murmured agreement started rippling through the crowd. Most of them had dealt with her complaints before. Trash cans, holiday lights, lawn ornaments, dog breeds, nothing had ever been good enough for Nan. I could see it in her eyes, the moment it all started to unravel. The power she thought she had was slipping away in the most public way possible. She opened her mouth to fire back, but her words caught in her throat when a familiar voice joined the scene. "Ma'am," Officer Singh said as he approached the crowd. "You okay?" She turned to him with a desperate glimmer in her eye, like he was going to be her savior. "Officer Singh, you need to arrest him. He's been threatening me. He's been trespassing, harassing, manipulating my property. He's dangerous." Singh blinked once, then slowly turned his head to me, then back to her. "Are you suggesting Mr. Prescott Samo net a storm and felled a pine tree with his mind?" Even Nyan had to pause at how insane that sounded when said out loud. "No, but it's retaliation," she stammered. "It's harassment. He turned the whole neighborhood against me." Singh didn't even bother with the notebook. "Ma'am, unless you have actual evidence of criminal behavior, you need to calm down. There's a city crew en route to assess the damage and secure the structure. I suggest you return inside." She stood there, sputtering, soaked and wild-eyed, before finally muttering something about insurance fraud and storm conspiracies, and stormed back across her lawn, barefoot, robe dragging, dignity shredded. A few neighbors exchanged glances, some rolled their eyes, others laughed under their breath. Me? I didn't say anything. I just went home, closed the door, and let out a long, slow breath. I wanted to believe that was the end of it, that karma had handled the situation, that the message had been received. But I should have known better, because crazy doesn't give up, it just reloads. The next few days passed quietly. No more screaming, no chainsaws, not even a fake violation notice. Glenn called to say the city had cited her for multiple violations: improper drainage, an unsafe tree, and even expired home repair permits. The kicker? The complaints came from her. She submitted a whole packet to the city last month, Glenn told me, barely able to hide the smirk in his voice. Trying to prove we need stricter enforcement. Filed complaints on every house, including her own. They followed up, and the only one that stuck was hers. Poetic. I should have been satisfied, and for a while, I was. The tree drama had calmed down. The neighborhood had rallied around me. Even old Ms. Dunlap baked me banana bread and called me a modern-day John Wayne. But I never let my guard down. And good thing I didn't. Because the real nightmare came back under moonlight. It was a quiet Sunday morning when Officer Singh knocked on my door again. The sun was barely up, and he looked grim. "She came back," he said simply. My stomach dropped. "When?" "Last night, around 2 in the morning. He handed me a USB drive, pulled from my own security system apparently. Footage shows her scaling your fence. She had a chainsaw." I watched the footage later in my office. There she was, Nanlair, dressed in black, climbing over my back gate like a wannabe spy, chainsaw in hand. She crept through the shadows and made her way to the oak, or what was left of it. She revved the saw and started cutting again. Same trunk, same spot she'd attacked before. Only this time, she didn't get very far. A neighbor heard the noise and called it in. Officers arrived minutes later and caught her mid-slice, standing in the dark with the chainsaw buzzing, arrested on the spot, charged with felony trespass and destruction of property. But the damage had been done. City arborists came out that same day to assess the wound. Their verdict was immediate and brutal. The cut was too deep. The structural integrity was compromised. The tree, my oak, had to come down. I'm not ashamed to say it. I cried. I cried, and I didn't care who saw. That tree wasn't just wood and bark to me. It was a fixture of my life. It shaded my childhood birthdays, my dad's retirement barbecue, and every lazy Sunday nap I took in the hammock beneath its branches. Every dog I'd ever owned had dug a hole under that tree. That oak had stood strong through decades of storms, droughts, winters, and the occasional overzealous squirrel invasion. And now, brought down not by time or nature, but by spite. When the arborist gave his final word, it felt like a punch to the gut. The roots might still be alive, but the core was wounded. It wasn't safe anymore. They gave me 2 weeks to schedule a professional removal. I stared up at its canopy one last time that night, lit by the soft glow of my security lights, and it actu. Ally felt like saying goodbye to a family member. The neighborhood knew what that tree meant to me, and what Nyan had done. The very next day, Alina showed up with a plate of cookies and a clipboard. "We're organizing a watch group," she said matter-of-factly. "You're not dealing with this alone." Within 2 days, she had half the block signed up for rotating night watches. No one wanted a repeat of what happened, or what could have happened if the police hadn't gotten there in time. James, one of the HOA board members, fast-tracked a vote to update security policies. New surveillance standards, neighborhood patrol hours, a hotline for suspicious behavior. The community that had once been divided over lawn flamingos was now united, thanks to a chainsaw-wielding lunatic. Even Ms. Dunlap, who was nearly 90 and usually only emerged for church and 4th of July potlucks, knocked on my door with a peach cobbler and a handwritten recipe for blueberry jam. She said, "I lost a tree once. Storm took it in '84. I know what that kind of emptiness feels like." Then she gave my hand a squeeze, and I swear I almost cried again. But nothing prepared me for what came next. A week after the arrest, a black SUV rolled into my driveway. Out stepped a tall man in his early 50s, salt and pepper beard, wearing a suit too nice for Willow Bend. He didn't look like a lawyer, and he certainly didn't look like another HOA representative. He introduced himself simply. "Martin Lair, Nayan's ex-husband." I didn't know what to say. I braced myself for some kind of confrontation, maybe even a veiled threat, but what he said caught me completely off guard. "I'm sorry," he said. "I've been hearing from our kids. I didn't know it had gotten this bad." He didn't make excuses, didn't try to justify her behavior, just stood there, heavy-eyed and honest. "She needs help," he admitted. "But that make any of this okay?" Then he reached into his coat pocket and handed me a business card. A tree specialist, someone who works with historic oaks, someone who could grow saplings from legacy acorns. Martin said he'd already spoken with the guy, arranged for him to come out, covered everything, removal costs, landscaping, even the damages to my fence where she'd climbed over. "She destroyed something you loved," he said. "I can't undo that, but I can try to help replace what was lost." I didn't have words. I just nodded, shook his hand, and watched him drive away. When the removal team came, I was there the whole time, watched every branch come down, watched the trunk get lifted piece by piece. It felt like watching a monument fall. But I saved a piece, a thick slice of the trunk, polished and sealed. It sits in my living room now like a coffee table with a heartbeat. A few weeks later, the tree specialist showed up. He brought with him something I hadn't expected. A 15-year-old white oak grown from the acorn of a 300-year-old parent tree in upstate New York. Hardy, beautiful, with potential that stretched generations. We held a tree warming party the day it went into the ground. Neighbors brought snacks and lawn chairs. The kids made little signs that said things like, "Grow strong" and "Future shade." Glenn gave a short, heartfelt speech about community and perseverance. And when it was time, I grabbed the shovel, lowered that young oak into the soil, and whispered something only it could hear. To roots that run deep, to shade that heals, to new beginnings. We buried a small metal plaque near the base, nothing fancy, just a date and a single word: resilience. That day, for the first time in months, I felt peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from silence, but the kind that comes from being surrounded by people who care, who fight for each other, who show up with cobbler and jam, recipes and motion sensor lights when things get weird. Nain never returned. The trial didn't drag out either. With all the footage, the police reports, and her prior warnings, her lawyer pushed for a plea deal. She was sentenced to community service, mandatory mental health treatment, full restitution, and, by court order, was forced to sell her home and leave Willow Bend permanently. She was gone within the month. And me? I go out to the backyard sometimes, sit in my old chair, and watch that young oak sway in the breeze. It's not the same tree, but it's a new story, one that the whole neighborhood helped plant. The funny thing about trees is that you don't realize how much a part of your life they are until they're gone. And when you lose one, it's like the skyline changes, like your past shifts slightly out of reach. But watching that young oak take root, watered by neighbors who once barely waved at each other, I realized something deeper. This wasn't just about a tree. It was about community, about standing your ground when someone tries to bulldoze their way through your life, about showing what real resilience looks like when faced with ego, entitlement, and a chainsaw. There were days when I'd walk past the old stump, now a level platform filled with flower pots and bird feeders. I kept the slice of trunk inside, but I couldn't quite bring myself to grind down the roots. Something about letting them stay felt right. Like they still belonged there, like they still held memories too deep to erase. Word got around about what happened. First the neighborhood, then the HOA board, and eventually people from neighboring communities. I even had a guy knock on my door asking if I was the tree guy from Willow Bend. Apparently, someone had posted security footage of Nyan scaling my fence on a community forum, and the video had made its rounds. People were both horrified and admittedly fascinated. It had all the makings of a suburban legend, an entitled woman, an ancient oak, a midnight trespassing, and poetic justice via storm damage. I suppose it's funny, if it hadn't been so real. Glenn invited me to speak at the next HOA meeting. I almost declined, but then I figured, why not? It wasn't about getting back at Nan. It was about making sure no one else tried to follow her footsteps with forged documents and imaginary bylaws. The room was packed, more than I'd ever seen. Even folks who had never attended an HOA meeting before showed up. I told the story simply, no drama, no embellishments, just the truth. When I finished, people applauded. Not because I was some kind of hero, but because everyone in that room had felt the sting of someone like Nyan at some point in their lives. Someone who thinks rules are only there to serve their version of control. Someone who pretends authority where none exists, who confuses personal preference with community standards. The board passed new transparency guidelines that night. All communication had to go through verified HOA emails. No more fake fines, no more forged letterheads, no more confusion about who actually had the authority to tell you where to put your mailbox or what color mulch you could use. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. A month after the trial, I got one final envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a simple typed letter. I'm sorry for everything. I've started treatment. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just wanted you to know. No signature, but I didn't need one. It was from her. I sat with that letter for a while, read it once, then again, then folded it neatly and tucked it away. Not to forget, but to remember that people, even the worst ones, are still people. Sometimes broken, sometimes lost, but always capable of at least trying to be better. I didn't tell anyone about it, not even Glenn. Some things don't need to be community business. The summer passed quietly. The new oak started to settle in. Its leaves turned deep green. The kids started using my backyard again, setting up lemonade stands and chalk drawings along the path. One little girl, Ellie, asked if she could name the tree. I told her she could. Let's call it Phoenix, she said, because it rose up after everything burned down. And somehow, that felt perfect. I put a small sign next to it, just a hand-painted plank with Phoenix written in blocky white letters. Nothing fancy, but it made people smile when they walked past. Sometimes I still think about that morning I found Nyan with the chainsaw, about how quickly life can shift from calm to chaos with the flick of a motor, about how entitlement, when mixed with power and instability, can rot faster than any tree ever could. But more than that, I think about how people showed up, how they rallied, how we didn't just get through it, we grew through it. And now, I want to ask you something. What would you have done in my place? Would you have pressed charges? Let karma take its course? Tried to reason with someone who clearly wasn't playing by any rules? I'm genuinely curious, because if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that the deeper your roots, the harder the wind has to blow to knock you down. And sometimes, just sometimes, that storm only makes you grow stronger. Fall came early that year. The leaves on Phoenix, yes, I had started calling it that too, began to blush red and orange before any other tree on the block. It was almost like it was showing off, like it knew it had something to prove. I'd sit on the back porch most evenings with a cup of coffee, just watching the wind move through its branches. There was something healing about it, about the slow, steady way life puts things back together when no one's looking. But even as things settled down in Willow Bend, a few ripples still remained. For starters, the house Nyan once lived in sat empty for months. A bank took possession, but no one seemed eager to buy. Word had gotten around about the tree, the arrest, the trial, about what happened at 2 a.m. under moonlight with a roaring chainsaw. A couple of realtors came by, snapped photos, took measurements, and left with raised eyebrows. The property became something of a neighborhood ghost, not haunted in the supernatural sense, but by reputation. Glenn told me the HOA had quietly voted to blacklist her from future property ownership in the community. Apparently, there's a clause in the bylaws that allows the board to block homeowners with a history of criminal mischief directly related to association business, rarely used. But in this case, no one questioned it. The vote was unanimous. Meanwhile, the neighborhood started changing in small but beautiful ways. People who used to just nod at each other at the mailbox now shared tools, recipes, and Sunday morning coffee on their porches. The shared experience, however chaotic it had connected us. I'd get home from work and find Alina had left herbs from her garden on my doorstep. Kids would leave chalk messages on my driveway. We your tree. Even James, who once reported my Halloween lights for being too animated, started helping me repair the fence panels Nan had damaged. That's when I realized something. Nan had meant to tear down, to impose control, fear, and superiority. But what she accidentally did was build. Because her destruction forced us to build something stronger, together. One Saturday, Glenn invited me to a special meeting of the HOA leadership. Not just a regular agenda, he said, something more important. I showed up expecting budget talk or maybe more chatter about approved flower colors. But what I walked into was a surprise. A dozen folding chairs, a small podium, and a plaque wrapped in tissue paper. Glenn smiled. This community's been around for 46 years, Miles. We've seen storms, power outages, and even a brief squirrel uprising during the bird feeder crisis of 2009. But we've never had someone stand up and handle conflict the way you did. I tried to laugh, maybe crack a joke, but he raised a hand. No, you need to hear this. He pulled back the tissue paper and revealed a bronze plate mounted on oak wood, taken from my original tree, it turned out. It read, "In recognition of strength through adversity, for reminding us that roots matter, and so does standing tall. Willow Bend honors Miles Prescott." I didn't know what to say. I think I muttered something awkward like, wow, thanks? But in truth, I was a little choked up. They mounted the plaque next to the HOA pavilion under the community bulletin board. Every time someone stops to check event flyers or garage sale ads, they see it. And yeah, I still feel weird about it. I didn't do anything heroic. I just protected what was mine. But maybe that's the point. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't look like a big speech or a cape fluttering in the wind. Sometimes it looks like telling someone, no, you don't get to walk all over people because you read a half-baked bylaw in a Facebook group. Sometimes it looks like filing a police report, installing cameras, or saying goodbye to something you love because it was ruined by spite. And sometimes it looks like planting something new and watching it grow with the people who stood by you when things went sideways. That's the thing about trees. They don't move fast. They don't roar or make a scene, but they endure. Winter crept into Willow Bend with a quiet chill, the kind of cold that didn't scream or snap. It just settled in, slowly frosting the windows and painting the rooftops in silver. The air got sharper, but the neighborhood didn't hibernate. In fact, it leaned in. That year, more houses than ever lit up for the holidays. Nothing gaudy or over the top, just warmth. lights strung over eaves, wreaths on doors, candles flickering in windows. And right in the center of it all, Phoenix stood tall, still young, still thin-limbed, but proud. Its branches now wrapped in soft golden lights. Someone had placed a single star at the top, not out of tradition, but because it just felt right. I stood beneath it one evening, coffee in hand, breath turning to mist in the air. Alina joined me a minute later, wrapped in a scarf the size of a small tent. We didn't say much, just looked up at the lights. "He's doing good," she said, nodding toward the tree. "She," I replied with a half-smile. "Ellie named her Phoenix, and Ellie's never wrong." We both laughed, and for a moment all the chaos of the past months felt like a strange dream. Chainsaws, fake fines, police reports, courtrooms, gone. Not forgotten, but no longer looming. A few minutes later, more neighbors wandered over. James with his thermos of homemade cider, Ms. Dunlap with her latest experiment, gingerbread cookies shaped like garden tools. Even Glenn came by, wearing a sweater with blinking reindeer and passing out candy canes like he ran the North Pole. We didn't plan it, but somehow that night turned into a gathering. No HOA business, no rules, just people. Kids played tag under porch lights. Dogs chased each other around the mailbox cluster. Someone brought out a Bluetooth speaker, and carols hummed softly through the air. And Phoenix stood at the center, lights twinkling, like it was soaking up every bit of joy. I realized Zed something then. Something I hadn't said out loud but had been feeling for weeks. This wasn't about Nyan anymore. Yes, she tore something down. Yes, she caused pain, disruption, and loss. But she also lit a fuse under something we'd all forgotten: how to care, how to look out for each other, how to build something better, not just with wood or soil, but with intention. She left behind more than a house with a cracked roof and a reputation. She left behind a reminder that control isn't community, and that rules without respect mean nothing. In the end, she tried to cut down a tree, but she planted a neighborhood, and maybe she didn't mean to, but the roots took anyway. I looked around that night and saw a community no longer just tolerating each other, but choosing each other. Every handshake, every casserole, every shared laugh, stronger than before, deeper than before, like roots finally finding water after a long, dry season. As the night wound down and people headed home, Ellie tugged on my coat. "Did the tree hear everything?" she asked. "I think so," I said. "Trees remember more than we do." She grinned. "Good, then it'll remember this forever." And with that, she skipped off, humming some holiday song, leaving tiny boot prints in the frost-covered grass. I stayed a little longer, just me and Phoenix under the winter stars. And in that quiet, I whispered one last thing. We made it.